everybody. Before we jump into today's episode, we have two sponsors we want to say thank you to for supporting this show. The first one is Routine. You guys have heard me talk about Routine, honestly, back from the early days of the podcast, and it's still a product I use every single morning. They have a prompt for me here. I'm going to do a little impromptu on this ad read today because honestly, this is a product that I truly believe in. And so I'm just going to tell you guys exactly what I think and why. First and foremost, this is a stat that they shared, but when you sleep, you lose between a pound and a pound and a half of water. And most of that's just sweating while you sleep. I used to not know if that was actually true, to be honest. I felt like a pound to a pound and a half of water seemed like quite a bit while I slept. But the one thing I did constantly pay attention to when I started using Routine was just the fact that before using Routine, I always felt a little dehydrated in the morning. And I'm one of those people that when I get up really early usually. I work out. One of the first things I do is some form of fitness. It's just like what I do before everyone's awake. And so it's very easy for me to grab a coffee, pre-workout, an energy drink, something with caffeine in it, and just go. When I am good about using Routine, first, I basically they come in these little single serve packets. They contain half an organic lemon, a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, Himalayan sea salt, all 6 essential electrolytes, and they have no sugar in them at all. A lot of hydration products are going to have sugar. So one of the things about Routine that I love is that there's no sugar in there. So when I am good about doing this consistently, I will take one of those single serve packets, I'll throw it in my mixer bottle, and whether I also put in a pre-workout or something with caffeine or I just drink that separately, I try to drink that first. And the days I do that, I do genuinely feel hydrated and just have a different form of clarity all morning. A lot of people have tried to make their own homemade versions of Routine, right? You see people they take a shot of the apple cider vinegar, they put a little sea salt, a little lemon in a drink. This is essentially that, but in a product that you can take with you on the go, have it ready for you first thing in the morning. I know me personally, when I'm groggy rolling out of bed, the last thing I want to do is, squeeze a lemon, cut lemons up, go get the apple cider vinegar, find my sea salt. I just rip this packet open, throw it in my water, drink it, and it's good to go. You can try yours today. If you haven't tried it yet and you've been listening to this podcast for years, just try the damn Routine. Give it a shot. You can use code ShaneWhite30 and get 30% off your first order. So you get 30% off by using code ShaneWhite30 and go to yourroutine.com. To make it even easier, I've added the link to yourroutine.com in the show notes. So just click on the show notes for this episode, click on the link to yourroutine.com, and don't forget to use code ShaneWhite30. All right, guys, today's episode is also brought to you by NeuroRoast. Again, I'm going to go a little off script here. NeuroRoast is a product that I also came across during this year of 2023. They are a coffee company that's helping you optimize your brain function and overall well-being. This is another product that, to be honest with you, when I first started working with it, I was a little on the fence. I was like, do I really want to have mushrooms in my coffee? Well, folks, I will tell you, when I use NeuroRoast, one of the things that has stood out to me the most is I'll back up. People that know me know that I have way too much caffeine, typically. One of the things this year I've done a good job of is cutting out alcohol. Not completely, but predominantly, I don't touch a lot of alcohol anymore. What I think I've actually done the other way, though, is add a lot more caffeine. So I do definitely drink too much caffeine. That's something I need to work on next year, is to try to minimize how much of that. But NeuroRoast is something that has actually helped me. Because of the way they've formulated their coffee, like unlike regular coffee, which is, still something I consume, but NeuroRoast specifically doesn't cause jitters or crashes. Mushroom coffee provides more balance and sustained energy, allowing you to stay focused and productive throughout the day. So the times I do use NeuroRoast, I'll be honest, I just don't feel that jittery, like, I'm jumping out of my chair or standing here at my desk, jumping around feeling. So give NeuroRoast a try. They have some really good flavors. I'll be honest too, the two guys that started NeuroRoast are just really good dudes based out of New York, and they're hustling, and hopefully they can get some people to try NeuroRoast this holiday season by listening to this podcast. So for you folks who've been on the fence, I'm telling you, it tastes delicious. They've done a fantastic job of making this coffee not only be functional, but taste fantastic. And if you want to try NeuroRoast, you can use code ShaneWhite. So it's super simple, just ShaneWhite at checkout. you'll also get 30% off. So if you go to neuroroast.com, and once again, I have added that to the show notes. So just click into the show notes while you're listening to this episode. You can click on NeuroRoast link directly. Don't forget to use code just Shane White, and you'll get 30% off your order. Hope you guys love both these products. I'm trying to not only bring you guys products that I use, but that I believe in on the podcast. I'm not taking ad reads for any brands that I don't really believe in. So anyway, hope you guys love both those products, yourroutine.com and neuroroast.com. I've added those links to the show notes. I hope you guys love it. And I got an awesome guest coming up right after this. All right, everybody, back for another episode. This is number 5, believe it or not. And this one is going to be fun. This is a little more Kyle's expertise and domain. And so hopefully I'm going to play Steelman and ask some questions to help everyone get a little value today. But we're hitting on variations on Amazon. For most people who don't deal with Amazon in the weeds, you probably have no idea what a variation is. And so this episode is going to be for people who either work with Amazon or even not. If you work with a product or a brand that sells on Amazon, it's good to know kind of the 101 of what variations do and the benefits of the different types of ways you can structure them. So without further ado, I'm going to spin it over to Kyle and let him give a little lowdown on variation.
Yeah, so the first obvious question, like what is a variation? A variation on Amazon allows you to group like items, whether it be from a size perspective, flavor perspective, usage occasion. You can essentially group items together on one landing page. So if you go to, and it's very, very common within apparel, it's like if you search, Halloween t-shirt, most likely a lot of the top ranked items will have several different design t-shirts that you can choose from, and then you drop down and you can select your size. So it's just a way to get multiple items on one list.
And for people who have don't work with Amazon, Kyle, I think probably most people that are on Amazon, they just assume that's just the way Amazon tells you to do it. But you actually control what it looks like, how that drop down is featured, the functionality of it. You control all that.
Yeah, so the variation build, it's honestly one of the most finicky things that sellers do on Amazon, which is one of the big cons of a variation is just the Amazon will publish things within your variation that you do not ask them to or do not input within, there's several different ways to build the variation, but let's say within the template that you would fill out. So it's a very, very finicky thing to build, and Amazon publishes wildly crazy, sometimes confusing information on the PDP that's been very difficult to fix. It's one of those situations, honestly, and I've been working with Amazon enough to be able to say this. If you build a variation that's 85% correct, you almost want to call it good at 85 because the risk of getting that extra 15% to make it look perfect doesn't always happen. So that's one of the cons of having a variation. Honestly, they're just difficult to set up.
Can you give an example of what's a variation that you publish it and all of a sudden it's just all screwed up? It looks completely wrong.
Yeah. So the most common one that we see is size nomenclature. So for instance, let's say you're selling protein bars and you have a 12 pack and a 4 pack. And you want to list both of those items on the same page. You'll input all of the information on the template, obviously correct, and as you want publish, and then Amazon will publish, instead of calling the 12 pack a 12 pack, they'll call it a pack of 12 ounces or something like that, something completely random. And it's obviously then confusing to the consumer because the consumer looks at that and potentially doesn't convert because they're not sure of what the size is. But I mean, you still have the title, they have the bullet point. So it's finicky, but that's one of the most common is typically with the size.
Yeah, and that's a good one because we always have the belief that if you come to the PDP and you have to click around to understand what you're buying and there's any confusion, you're most likely, you don't always lose consumers, obviously, but it definitely doesn't help. You want to make it as simple as possible. So to Kyle's point, it's one of those things that you try to set up once, you can make changes to it, but it's a big decision to make changes because if it does get screwed up, I think a heads up to anyone who's running a scaling Amazon businesses, it can cause havoc for daily sales for days and days and days if the variation doesn't get submitted correctly.
The other thing too that we warn brands about consistently is, let's say you have a big catalog, call it 150 plus items. There's kind of this, you don't want to have too many items on one page because the drop downs become extensive. The consumer gets potentially overwhelmed when they're shopping the site. So it's this balance of, there's not a fast and firm number, call it 20, 25 items that no more than that you want on a variation. One of the other cons too that's worth mentioning, and this is really a brand decision, but a variation, once it's created, becomes the sole face out item or listing within search. So let's go back to the protein bar example. You search protein bar, you see, let's say you have 5 items and they're unvariated. You would see potentially all 5 of your items within search as 5 separate listings. When you variate an item, that listing becomes 1. So you only see 1 listing within search. We would call that brand blocking, right? So variation, depending on your organic search rank and how many items you have in your catalog, when you variate, you potentially could lose that brand block for branded search.
And Kyle, what would you recommend though for brands? It obviously depends on the size and the scale, but let's say a brand is, let's use the example of a brand new company or product on Amazon, just getting started. They're trying to make money and not lose money in the beginning and just, be scrappy and profitable. What do we normally recommend? I think that's a good tip for people who are just getting started on Amazon. Like, how do you normally recommend in the beginning to start off?
Yeah, so it kind of goes into all of the pros of listing a variation, and then also the timing, right? Because it's not just get live, variate, and then go from there. There's some strategic things you can do to take advantage of some other Amazon programs, which I'll get to. But what we recommend is that you should variate. Creating quote unquote one master listing on Amazon allows you to, first and foremost, combine all of the reviews from the individual items. So let's say you have 3 individual items that you're selling. They each have 5 reviews. If you variate those 3 items together, the consumer is going to see that that item now has 15 reviews. So the consumer isn't necessarily savvy enough to understand how Amazon works. They look at that one item within the variation, they think, oh, that has 15 reviews. But in actuality, the combination of all 3 of those items is 15 reviews. So adding reviews together on one variation listing is one of the big pros. The second pro is, from an advertising perspective, if you think about having, in that same example with 3 items, you have 3 items that you potentially have to drive traffic to. Variating, you now have one central listing that you can drive all of your advertising campaigns to. And it also adds visibility to the fact that you have other flavors or other size options within your catalog. So for instance, let's say you're selling 3 protein bar items, you have peanut butter, chocolate, vanilla. You could set up a campaign within advertising to drive traffic for people searching chocolate. So chocolate protein bar, you would see the chocolate face out. Consumer would click on that because that's potentially what they were looking for. But then they would see, oh, you also have a couple other flavors that I might be able to try. So your conversion rates on advertising and your advertising efficiency tends to go up when you drive everything to a variation listing versus a solo PDP. Some of the other pros, I'm trying to think of, the reviews is one big one.
I think one there, Kyle, I would think is a new brand too. We talked about brand blocking a little bit, which would be, unvariated, which can be helpful for, I think one thing we've hit on it briefly actually in another podcast episode, but you can drive Vine reviews to each of those. So that's a good strategy in the beginning, right? Is taking advantage of Vine.
Yeah, so that comes down to the timing. So as I briefly mentioned before, you don't want to list all of your items and then immediately variate. Taking advantage of the Amazon Vine program is the easiest, quickest, kind of by the book in terms of Amazon policy way to get early reviews for items. Vine will limit an item's eligibility to run Vine as soon as that item has over 30 reviews. That also takes into consideration the total reviews for a variant listing. So if you have 3 items, let's say those 3 items now have 20 reviews each. If I were to variate those items together, that variant listing now has 60 reviews, and I cannot run Vine on any of the items in that variation. But if you don't variate those 3 items, you can run Vine on all 3 of those because they're below 30 reviews. You can run a max of 30 units through Vine, which typically results in around about 30 reviews. And so now all of those items have around about 50 reviews, then you variate them and now you have 150. So there's a bit of a timing strategy. You want to typically run Vine and then variate, because once you pass that 30 review threshold, you would have to unvariate, run Vine, revariate, and going back to like how finicky building variations is, you want to try to stay away from rebuilding variations as much as possible.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a big one. Is there two ways to actually submit variations? Is there a way that's like through an Excel? I know that you've talked about this
Oh God,
before.
there's like
There's more than that.
4.
Okay. Is there a way you
I think
normally
that's,
recommend?
yeah, I mean, I recommend using the edit products template, but even within that template, as someone who has very minimal Amazon experience, that template, depending on the category, is 75 plus columns of information that
Oh, wow.
if you were to download that template and look at it, you'd be like, oh, I need 75 pieces of information for every item. When in actuality, to build a variation using that template, you really only need to fill out like maybe 8 or 9 columns of information for each item.
And they
And
don't
Amazon
really
does
make that
Amazon,
clear.
yeah, no, they do not make it very clear. So you have to have experience with that template to use it. I find the template has the highest success rate. You can also do it through what's called a variation wizard, which I have had very little success with. You can also then do it by like when the actual items are set up. So let's say you have 4 items, they're all different flavors of a similar product. You can actually set up a variation as you're building those ASINs. Again, I've had very little success with that way as well. So it's part of the struggle with Amazon is sometimes it takes a month or 2 months of going back and forth via contact us ticket, which anyone who's worked with Amazon before understands the success rate of those tickets is pretty low. So yeah, I recommend using the template, but even that you need to know what you're doing because otherwise you'll waste a ton of time filling out columns that are just not necessary.
Got it. Yeah, variations seem to be honestly one of the most complex, finicky, never clean and simple processes, but definitely some good tips and tricks today. This is great. If anyone has questions, obviously it's what we do. Variations is just a big part of setting up any PDP page, and it's something we do at NoBul Partners. So if you have more questions or want to find out more information, by all means, let us know.